so much, Abid, Sham, and everyone else. We hope to procure time. So, once again, thank you for coming out here on a very busy Memorial Day weekend. But we're very excited to introduce our special guest speaker, Nitesh Gor, who is my hero. I've known him for about 12 years now, and he's incredible. I mean, I'm really excited for you to hear from him. He's an author of multiple books. He's wrote Dharma of Capitalism, maybe it was released about 10 years ago, is that right?
Yeah.
And then Before Religion was just released a few months ago, with his next book coming out in the next few months as well, hopefully. So Nitesh is incredible. He founded the Avanti Schools and is the current CEO. The Avanti Schools have now 12 schools based in England, over 6,500 children, and we're the first Hindu-based schools in the UK, as well as having some non-faith-based spiritual schools, which I think Nitesh will probably tell us a bit more about. And he's founded many different other projects as well, including Om, which is a beautiful restaurant. If any of you are in London, please check it out. It's got a beautiful yoga space like this upstairs as well. And the Vedanta, which was actually my wedding venue. And I also work for Avanti, so he basically controlled my whole life. But he's a genius, he's incredible, such an amazingly kind person as well, and I'm excited for you to hear from him today. He's going to be speaking a little bit about Before Religion, his latest book. And hopefully you'll enjoy it. If you have any questions, we'll have time for questions after a wonderful videographer, Rishabh, will come around with a mic. Just for recording afterwards. So if you have questions, just wait for Rishabh, he'll come around and hand you a mic, and then we can go from there. But without further ado, you can please introduce Nitesh with a big round of applause.
Thank you, Raj. I actually did pay him to say that. Can you hear me okay, or do I need a mic?
I think you need a mic.
I need a mic. Don't like mics. Okay, hopefully that's better. Closer? Okay, he manages everything, and I'm just like, go along. Well, thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to be here. First time. I actually lived in New Jersey for 3 years during high school, but it's the first time I'm doing any kind of speaking arrangement in the US. So, better? Okay. So, what I thought because I'm feeling a bit high actually, because walking around New York, it's like the most, for like 30 years I've avoided passive inhalation of cannabis since my college days, and like walking around New York is like crazy. But so I'm trying to get my bearings still. What I thought we could do, so that this doesn't turn into like just a straight lecture, is that I would like to read a couple of passages from the book, just to plant some seeds and thoughts in terms of the topic about universal spirituality through the Vedic lens. Hopefully you're familiar with the word Vedic, referring to ancient India's scriptural textual basis. And from there we'll just touch upon a couple of points in the early chapters. So I'll speak for about 15-20 minutes, something like that. And then I'm hoping that will be sufficient kind of prompts for a conversation to emerge. Is that okay? So don't let me down. So I thought I could start with a bit from the introduction, which essentially, Raj mentioned that we have 12 schools, and 7 of them are faith designated schools, 5 of them are non-faith designated schools, but they have the same spiritual ethos. And so one of the challenges that we came across was what does spirituality look like in a secular or in a non-religious context? So you've all heard the phrase spiritual but not religious. It's like a big thing. It started with the whole cultural creatives research that happened here in the US in the 1990s. Turns out that something like 50% of the population are interested in lots of things related to spirituality, but have some form of aversion to religious institutionalized kind of settings, right? So, and we all know the reasons why and all of that stuff. But that challenge came to us when we were setting up the community schools, because we wanted them to have a very strong spiritual ethos, but not sectarian in the form of a religious designation. And as you can also imagine, it's pretty easy to think about spirituality in a tokenistic way. Be nice, be a kind person, close your eyes 20 minutes in the morning and clear your mind. That kind of level of spirituality. And obviously that's kind of skimming the surface. So our challenge was, what does deep, profound spirituality look like in a non-sectarian way? And for me, the Vedic texts, quite obviously, if you've heard of a group of texts called the Upanishads, the Upanishads are the philosophical, or the more philosophically kind of direct texts as part of the Vedic canon. And they have a very unique approach to explaining spirituality. And they're quite powerful in the way that they invite somebody into introspection and observation and thought prior to faith. Now, this is a really important point, and it's from my perspective, it's a fundamental distinction of the Vedic tradition, is how spirituality is conveyed and introduced prior to the requirement for faith in terms of belief, because most texts of a spiritual religious nature are premised on the idea that you believe, and if you don't believe, then you should believe. And in this book we'll tell you what to do and what not to do, and then that's based on kind of the basis that you're coming at this from faith because it's the word of God, and the word of God should be accepted on the basis that is the word of God. Okay, so like it's basically self-evident. The Upanishads come at it from, and not just the Upanishads, actually even the Bhagavad Gita. If any of you read the Bhagavad Gita, it might strike you actually. Do you know, I've read the Bhagavad Gita several times, and it only more recently occurred to me that in the first half of chapter 2, Krishna is explaining about the self. I was supposed to read from the book. I'll get to it in a sec. Well, give me a moment. So in the first half of chapter 2, Krishna is explaining about the self. Now, in that first half of that chapter, he doesn't once mention the word Atma, or the self, or as in the Sanskrit word for the soul. He refers to the Atma in words like the embodied, or words like that, which are indirect. And at the end of that section, around verse 30, where he finishes the kind of metaphors and analogies around the self, he basically says to Arjuna that, hey, look, even if you don't believe all this, even if you believe that the living body, that the living being basically is born, so it starts to exist at birth and ends its existence, you don't believe in the eternal soul. Even if that's the case, still you have no reason to lament. Which means that back then, Krishna was acknowledging the potential of non-belief. Otherwise, why would he say that? And we know that in the Vedic tradition, there was a complete spectrum of beliefs within the Vedic tradition. And the Vedic tradition was able to accommodate for that very significant diversity of belief systems. And so I speak a little bit about that. So here we go. This is from the introduction. So ancient India was the land of spirituality and mysticism. But unlike many later civilizations, Vedic ideas refused to fit into rigid boxes. Fragments of these ideas spread along global trade routes, but only piecemeal, with neither their philosophical depth nor their breadth intact. As a result, their inclusive and integrative approach remains largely unknown in the West. This book is offered as a journey through the mysteries of that Vedic civilization, which once thrived on its sacred texts that avoid extremes and embrace plurality. These hidden treasures offers insight into the human condition, the nature of reality, and a goal that takes its seeker beyond sectarian limitations. Our current problems, with their apparent dichotomies, science versus religion, modernism versus postmodernism, social equity versus individual freedom, sustainability versus development, democracy versus authoritarianism, and so on, are not entirely new. I hope these, so I'll skip a bit. And nowhere are these insights more urgent than the way in which we engage with spirituality and religion. In recent times, religion seems to be jumping from one crisis to the next. With the history of all the stuff that we know that's bad about religion, the sole means of determining objective reality, and this has become the new religion of our times. So scientism has supplanted spiritual knowledge as a means to discover deeper truths. But science alone cannot answer all our questions, and nor is it meant to. Bertrand Russell said, almost all the questions of most interest to speculative minds are such as science cannot answer. Science tells us what we can know, but what we can know is little. And if we forget how much we cannot know, we become insensitive to many things of great importance. So there are many ways that you could frame the key questions of the Upanishads, right? And to keep it simple, I'll give you 3 for just the purposes of this conversation, and we can expand that to like 10, 20, whatever. But the 3 that really stand out to me, one is, who am I? Okay, you're all familiar with that question. It's like the bedrock of spiritual inquiry. And we'll get into that a little bit, mainly because the notion of who am I is not just about peeling back the layers of identity to get to essence, right? So like that's a spiritual, like one definition of a spiritual path could be that we're all multi-layered in terms of our identity. We have different identities in different contexts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then those identities, some are more external, some are more core, some are more temporal, some are more permanent. And then as you peel back all the layers of our various different identities, as you move towards the essence, that journey from external to internal is a spiritual journey. So the Upanishads, the Gita, the Vedic literature, provide us different routes or different ways to think about that journey, to provoke us into thinking about who am I really, okay? So, and that is, as I said before, important for us to remember, that is a priori faith, okay? So it doesn't require you to believe anything from the outset. It just requires you to be observant and to be self-reflective. And if you can do that, then the Vedas say you will come to the conclusion that the sages came to. You'll come to the same conclusion. Because in the West, we have this neat way of dividing up disciplines of knowledge. And 3 key ways are around philosophy, science, and religion. Okay? And we have neatly kind of separated them out as if they are conflicting or mutually exclusive. Whereas the Vedic tradition is totally the opposite. It recognizes that each of these 3 ways, essentially they're all looking for truth. And if you pursue any of them, science, philosophy, or religion, if you pursue any of them, you will arrive at truth, fundamental truth. But you have to pursue it with rigor and without kind of leaving aside kind of biases and prejudice and all this. So first question was? Okay. So, just checking. So the second question is, why is that? Like, stuff happens to me in my life and I have no reason why. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. But it's not according to my plan. So, if the world is as it should be, i.e. exactly how I want it to be, then that shouldn't happen. So what is it that leads to a situation that things happen that surprise me? Things happen that should not happen according to my plan. So why is that introduces this notion that it said that the Gita has 5 topics? Anybody know who the 5 topics are of the Gita? 2 should be very easy. Self, thank you. God, okay, thank you. So that's the 2 easy ones. Now you've got 3 left. Karma, well done. Oh, very good. Okay, so nature, right? So the nature like of reality, material nature. Okay, last one. This is always the last one.
Dharma.
No? Because Dharma is captured within karma and nature. No. You haven't seen the film Oppenheimer? Seen the film Oppenheimer?
Yeah.
Time. Oh, sorry, what did you say?
Yeah.
Well, okay, that's because Oppenheimer mistranslates it, by the way. He takes the word Kala, Krishna uses the word Kala and says his translation is death I am become the destroyer of the worlds, right? So whereas actually Krishna's word Kala means time. I mean, obviously Oppenheimer is a genius, but because Krishna is using that word time as the destructive force, and so he's translating it as death, which is true in a sense, but the literal translation is Kala, is time. So time. So when we understand the soul and God, so if we leave these two aside for a moment, the combination of material nature, what is material nature exactly? Because we don't know, by the way. We'll get to that in a second. Karma and time. And when I first heard about time, I thought, why is that one of the 5 topics of the Gita? It's bizarre. Like, it sounds bizarre, no? Like, it feels like, it seems to me anyway, it seemed like it doesn't belong in the list of 5. I would have thought Dharma or some other concept in the Gita. But when you understand how the Vedic literature speaks about time in such a powerful way, it says that these 3 things, karma, material nature, and time, in combination, explain the rules of the game. They explain the rules of the system we are in. And therefore, why is that? Because of these 3 things. Because these 3 things are acting and we are completely oblivious to them, therefore, things surprise us. Okay, so we've got 2 questions so far. Who am I? Why is that? And the third one is, what is this? Not what is this, literally, but what is this? What is this context in which I find myself? What is the nature of this reality? And this is what I meant by, when I was speaking about we don't know, I mean that quite literally. So, you know, when I studied at university, I spent most of my university time in chemistry labs, and it seemed pretty clear that we do know. Like, that's the way we were taught chemistry and physics and all the rest of it. Like, we know what the stuff is made of. We know the fundamental elements of the world. We know how they build up into macroscopic objects, and we can drill down even subatomically. So we know the structure of the atom, right? So, but the truth is that it's a bad question when you think about what is something made of. So if we just do this as a little experiment, so the paper here is made of what? Okay, is that hard? Is that a hard question? Carbon. Okay, great, thank you. So, and what is the carbon made of?
Neutrons, electrons.
Okay, and what are the neutrons, electrons, and protons made of?
Keeps on going.
Okay, so there's a problem with the question, because whatever you tell me, I can ask you, what is that made of, right? So right now we can get to like quarks, and then from quarks we can get to stuff that goes beyond whatever the latest terminology is beyond that. But fundamentally, I can keep asking the question, right? And so the Vedas know that that's a problematic way to think about the nature of reality. And so the Vedas come at it from a different perspective. They come at it from a qualitative perspective as opposed to a reductive perspective. And so the nature of reality, what is the nature of reality? The Vedas approach differently. And so these 3 questions open us up to a different way about thinking about the nature of reality, the human condition, what am I doing here, who am I, my relationship with the world, etc., etc., etc. And from there, we kind of see like the philosophical breadth of the Vedic tradition. And like I said, these are only 3 questions which I'm just posing here, but in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a core, you can say that it is essentially the essence is described of the Vedic literature. And within the Srimad Bhagavatam, there are 4 verses which are said to be the seed verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And those 4 seed verses were spoken by Krishna to Brahma. And what I've tried to do here, based on actually a book that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote in the 1800s, where he summarized the Srimad Bhagavatam through the lens of these 4 seed verses. And I'd read this book about 25 years ago, and it completely kind of gone out of my mind, but subconsciously it was there, because when I started writing this, I thought it was an original thought, but it wasn't. It was something, it was only until a friend told me that, hey, that's what Bhaktivinoda Thakur did. And then I went back to my copy and I saw I'd written notes on it. So it was obviously like a subconscious thing. But so what I've tried to do is divide up the content of the book into these 4 seed verses. And the first seed verse, Krishna speaks about how before everything, he was there. So like this notion of that ultimate reality, Krishna represents. Wait a minute. Is it 10 to 8?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I just realized I was, sorry, I'm so sorry. I wasn't going to speak for so long. I think I will, sorry? Time. Time I am. Okay, let me pause there. Okay, I realized that maybe I should have. I'll give you one more very short. You heard this story of the blind man and the elephant from the ancient Indian story. It's kind of like what's on the book cover. So the story, for those of you who don't know, is a group of blind men. I know it's politically incorrect, but that's the story. So a group of blind men approach this elephant, and they're touching different parts of the elephant, and they're all describing what they're feeling. And clearly, their description: somebody's touching the tail, somebody did the tusk, somebody did the leg, somebody the ear. So it all feels very different, and their descriptions are very different. And then they're describing it, and clearly, one person cannot imagine how the other person is touching the same thing, right? And so it leads to confusion, and the imagery on the cover was about how the idea of the elephant emerges through that conversation, like through the conversation of people understanding what the other person's saying. But for somebody to really have the acceptance that you are genuinely touching a different part of what I'm touching, we have to have the concept of the elephant, right? Like if we have a concept of the elephant, then I can make sense of that. I can accept what the other person is saying in terms of their description. And I think that that's a really powerful metaphor for how some of the times when we're thinking about the nature of reality and truth, that what is the concept or framework that we are working with that enables us to engage in dialogue with somebody who has a very different perspective, but also be able to accommodate that truth as real, and not just kind of on a level of tolerating, because we don't want to kind of like create social chaos, and therefore we'll tolerate each other, but from the perspective of a genuine acceptance. And I think that is another thing which the Vedic tradition offers, is the concept or the framework within which different ways people are contacting that ultimate reality. And so one of the things that I do in the first chapter, is outline the various different aspects of ultimate reality, as the Vedas in few places describe it, can be engaged with different people with different belief systems. And then I was going to go through some tests, like the Srimad Bhagavatam offers these essentially ways in which you can test to see whether a tradition is something that you want to engage with in terms of what it's promoting, what kind of civilization does it produce, what are its practitioners like in terms of their behaviors and all the rest of it. So in these different ways, what I've tried to do in the book is outline how you can approach spirituality in a non-sectarian way without having to water it down to something which is almost meaningless, by retaining, because I think that's a challenge, like how do we retain fidelity to a tradition, depth, the profoundness that comes from a practice, a spiritual practice, and yet at the same time be truly, genuinely inclusive and accepting, as opposed to just politically correct in conversations, and tokenistic in that acceptance. Okay, I am going to stop there, and hopefully that some of you have got some kind of points of conversation that you'd like to develop or contribute.
It seems like this book is in a way a manifestation of one of the schools that you have created, right? The school that has the Bhakti foundation, but it's not up front, right? That it's not up front, that it's not in the religious. So I'm curious to see how do you maintain those values?
Yeah.
And how does it relate to the book?
Yeah. Okay. It's a challenge. I think but I think it's been a really exciting challenge, and I think it's been. The reason why I'm really excited by it is because I think that if we can get it right, then we can introduce spirituality into the mainstream education system. And right now, I'm sure the US is very similar to the UK in that the education system is in a mess. And it's in a mess for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons is because we don't know how to respond to the demands and challenges that children in our schools are facing. And therefore, we're going down a couple of different routes, right? So one is we're over-medicating. One is we are being over-disciplinarian, and in terms of systemizing something which loses the personality or loses the personhood of the child in the system. And anyway, there are other ways in which we're messing up, and we don't have a solution. The education system, the government, the health system, we don't have a solution, because the solution is spirituality. Like when you ignore this fundamental aspect of human nature, when you just focus on academics or even character to the exclusion of spirituality because we don't want to touch it because it's religious somehow, then you exclude a fundamental part of a human being, and then you have a problem. And that's the problem I think the education system is facing. So one of the reasons why I wrote this was because I wanted to be able to frame spirituality so that people were not scared to speak about it because they thought it just meant religious. And to provide a definition. So I go through this in terms of providing a definition, a working definition. It's only a working definition in terms of what spirituality can mean. So I talk about it in 4 different ways. So I say one aspect of spirituality is about finding identity. That's the who am I question. Another aspect of spirituality is about raising consciousness. What are the things and practices that help me raise my state of consciousness and keep it raised for as long as possible? Okay. The third aspect we speak about is resisting materialism. Like there is a constant external push in terms of materialistic endeavor. And I don't just mean that in terms of consumerism, I just mean it more widely as well in terms of materialism, that thinking there is nothing other than that. And being able to resist that. Viktor Frankl talks about the gap, the gap between stimulus and response. He says the gap between, the space between stimulus and response is where free will lies. It's a very powerful observation. I mean, he got to it 5,000 years after Krishna said it in the Gita. But basically, we got there. That gap is about resisting materialism. Because, you know, when the Gita or the Vedas talk about human society just becoming animals, the reason why it's saying that is because there's no gap between stimulus and response. And when there's no gap between stimulus and response in a human being, you're acting like an animal, because that's what animals do. So that's the third aspect, is resisting materialism. And the fourth aspect is about connecting with something greater, i.e. dovetailing your life with a greater purpose, greater than you. So these four areas, which are fundamental in my, again, working definition, fundamental aspects of spirituality, they don't depend upon your faith. They don't depend upon an institution you might be connected to. They don't depend upon the name you give to God, whatever it is, right? Like, they are just what they are. And we've had, I would say, very encouraging responses from people of no faith and different faiths in terms of being able to engage in spirituality in that way. So it's definitely a journey. We're early stages, all of that stuff, long way to go, you know, we're taking baby steps. But I really honestly believe that education is where my head's at, but this is a societal problem. But if we want to change it, then there's no better place than in schools. Thank you.
Hello. I'm curious about the role of art practice in these schools.
Arts practice?
Yeah, because I know in my
wow.
own life that exposure to art and creative expression has like led me to bhakti and has led me to a great deal of introspection. So I would imagine that that would be a big part of it.
Yeah, I would say it's not as big as it should be, or it could be, and is going to be. But it is, yeah, I actually, there are examples I can give you in which, you know, they use art, like, so for example, they did this one brilliant kind of module as part of their examination years about taking chapter 2. So they took chapter 2 of the Gita, and they had to pick any of the analogies in chapter 2, metaphors that in chapter 2, and then convey that through a piece of art. And what they came up with was really fantastic. So there are ways, of course, in which art plays a role. And there's a book called by Rukmini Podar called Draw Your Emotions. So we're trying to get permission to use that in our personal development curriculum, and other ways in which you can introduce art. I would broaden the kind of question slightly. One of the things that I do ask our staff and students to do and to think about, to the point about raising consciousness, is I asked them to do a little exercise, and maybe you can try this at some point. And it was based on something. There's a devotee called Vrajabihari Das, who's a very close friend of mine, and I stole this from him. He says, write down 10 things that you like to do. I had to adapt it, because one time I said it to students, somebody wrote down PlayStation. I said, no, okay, it's 10 things which you like to do, you really like to do them, but they also raise your consciousness. You can feel it yourself. It's not me judging it, you judge it yourself. You like it, and it raises your consciousness, right? So just write a list of 10 things and then every day do one of those 10 things for 5 minutes. Sounds pretty simple, right? Just 5 minutes every day. And I did this with, like, we have about 1,000 staff. I did this with different groups of staff, and then I asked them to do that, and then I check in with them in about 2 weeks' time. And do you know how many do? Do you know how many people do the 5 minutes, or even every other day? Less than 5%. And I was like, I said to them, I'm your employer. I'm asking you to do something that you like. It's bizarre. And you know the number one excuse was, right? We've got no time. And obviously that's not true. Clearly that's not true, because we've all got 5 minutes. We all do many silly things for 5 minutes in the day, unnecessary things. So it really struck me, like, we just don't have but the reason why I referred to that is because I think different people will connect to different ways to engage in spirituality. For some people it will be art, for some people it's walking in nature, for some people it's speaking to another individual, whatever it might be. So I think what we're trying to do in the schools is to just bring attention to this idea that you can do something every day which will raise your consciousness. And if you pay attention to that, it will make a difference, if you do it consistently.
I have another question.
Yeah.
I know that at the Bhakti Center downtown, they were doing recently this Dharma talk in terms of one's career and choosing the right calling or connecting with your calling. And so I'm curious about whether there's an intentionality in the schools in terms of guidance counselors and conversations with kids specifically on their trajectory going forward, whether it's more school or more or work. What's your approach to that?
Yeah, this is a huge challenge. The theory is very straightforward. I wrote a book called The Dharma of Capitalism. It was 15 years ago, actually, I just remembered. But it uses the framework of what are in the Gita called the gunas and varna, which give you the matrix through which you can identify and then engage with that which is your intrinsic kind of qualities aligned work. The challenge is that I think it's a very small percentage of students that I come across who have real clarity into using that framework, that they come up with something which is clearly identifiable into one of the buckets. And many draw on different aspects of that and then come up with almost like a mixed version of that. So career guidance through that lens alone, I think is challenging because of that, because many of us feel drawn in different directions.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's not as clear as the theory might imply. And that's because it was practiced in an age where there was clarity, or at least more than now. So what we do is we're starting to create a framework which uses that as an input, but it's not the only input. And interestingly also, I said that the person called Bhaktivinoda Thakur had written something on the Bhagavatam. He also, I can't give you the reference, but he also said that in more ancient times, at age 8, to guide a student's education and future specialization, a group of people would come together to discuss that child. And that group would comprise of the teacher, the child's older sibling, a parent, a community elder, and he mentions 2 or 3 others. And they come together, they discuss this child, and they give obviously a very rounded perspective on this child, and then they suggest different subjects or specializations for that child to start studying from age 8 onwards. And then at 14 they come back together, and then they rediscuss it and they tweak it. And I thought, that's such a genius idea. If only if we had that resource to be able to do that, we'd all have found our calling a lot earlier than many of us do. And so it's complex. But I think where we've ended up is we have to form some version of that, where the gunas, which is what Varnashram is based on, the gunas, Varna, play a role. The role of, and the input of others also plays a role, but is supported by a wider conversation with the student. And we haven't cracked that yet.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me because I feel like that last reference, I know at least with myself, partially the challenge has been like quieting the other voices,
Right.
and instead like connecting with what feels like my calling, regardless of what other people think.
Yeah. And one way to do that, I often tell students, is that, like, don't think that you're going to sit in an armchair and figure it out. Like, if you think that that's going to happen, I mean, it's like, it's a very rare person that that's going to happen to. Like, if you don't know what you want to do, just get out and do something, right? It doesn't really matter. You'll learn something. Just get out there and do something. And through that process, you'll learn something about yourself. You might learn what you don't like, which is learning something, right? So it's better than, just twiddling your thumbs. So if that's an expression here, but it is in the UK, it's this. It's I think in this day and age, it has to be a combination of different things. But I think one of the most powerful ways is actually just getting out there and getting some experience in different areas, and then having good people around you to be able to give you some feedback and be open with you about where they see your strengths and weaknesses are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Others? Anything?
So, what does it mean to have a material calling or career when you're trying to be spiritual? Like when you're isn't that like a kind of a dichotomy, or how do you reconcile the two?
Yeah. See, I think one way to think about this, which again the Vedic tradition has a really amazing perspective on, is what do we mean by material? Isn't it? Like, what do we mean? So when we say material, if you think about that for a moment, because I think we use the word a lot, but I don't think we necessarily really challenge ourselves to understand what we're saying clearly. So just for a moment, maybe 10 seconds, 20 seconds, define in your head what you mean by material in a sentence. And then I'll pick on you. Okay? You got something? What have you got?
It ends when life ends. It's not eternal.
Okay. Temporary.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else got something else?
I'd say that material is a concept of like anything that kind of takes your energy away from spirituality, or I guess like anything deeper per se. So like I guess examples are like things that you like will get addicted to, or like stuff like that. Versus like say you're like doing a job or a career, that doesn't necessarily mean it might be taking you away from like God or from spirituality or from finding yourself.
Yeah.
That could just be something you're doing to help
Yeah,
sustain yourself while
Okay.
you're doing that simultaneously.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Others? Anyone else?
Yeah, I think similar to what you said, from my understanding, material means that something that's not really connected to your soul, the purpose of your soul.
Yeah. Okay. Others? Anyone want to have a stab?
Something that can be experienced by the senses.
Something that can be experienced.
Anything that can be experienced by the senses.
Okay.
I think material pursuits tend to be like generally for yourself, or like something that really benefits you directly, or in like a really, really fast and quick way.
Okay. So I'll challenge some of these things, right? Like just for the fun of it, but there is a point to it. Just because I think there's a different way of answering the question. Like you could say, like an easy one is the sense one, right? Like you could say that if I'm reading the Bhagavad Gita, I'm taking that in with my senses. If I'm speaking mantras, I'm hearing that. You know, like you could say that that's a sensual engagement of you could also say that my the point about how something starts and ends. The Vedic kind of understanding is, I know where we're all coming from that perspective, that the material and spiritual distinction, in a way, is a categorization just so that we can speak about it, just so that we can engage with the issue. See, ultimately, material nature, from the Vedic perspective, everything is Brahman. Krishna's energy is one. He has one energy. That energy, as in means then divides, so you've got the Brahman, and then added to that Brahman is the guna. The gunas, like the material energy. But the foundational aspect, when just like the sun and the cloud, right? We have that example where you have the sun and then the cloud comes in front, but the sun's still there, and the sun is shining through the cloud, and then when the cloud goes, you get the direct sunlight, but when the cloud's there, you get the sunlight through the cloud. Okay, so that's the idea, that there's the Brahman, which is the sun, and then the cloud is the avidya energy. Now, so in a sense, at a fundamental level, because it's all Krishna's energy, it is all spiritual. Now the question is, when that energy, when that thing is, I think you were speaking about it, kind of taking us away from knowing its spiritual nature, we call that material. So the same book, the same paper can be used to publish unnecessary literature, or it can be used to publish sacred texts. One is material, one is spiritual. Why is that? Made of the same stuff. Right? Exactly. It's the intention, the purpose, the utility. Srila Prabhupada used the example of the knife, right? Somebody's using it to hurt somebody, somebody's using it to save somebody. So in that way, like to your question about is it a dichotomy, that's why it's not a dichotomy, because fundamentally the point is that material nature, it's not the question of like this is material and therefore it's bad, this is spiritual and therefore it's good. That's not the categorization. The categorization only is whatever it is, if it's used in the service of others, if it's used for developing our spiritual nature and helping us engage with reality, then it's good. And if not, then it's harmful. So therefore, whatever job, whatever career it is, the challenge for us is how do we connect everything that we do, including our careers, to a spiritual end? Because otherwise, what can sometimes happen if you are feel you're on the spiritual journey, you want to dedicate your your energy and time and life to spiritual pursuit. If your day-to-day is disconnected, then that can be quite a challenge just on a day-to-day basis, because it's like, what am I doing here? Like, how is this anything I want to do? So yeah, the challenge for us is like, how do I connect that? As opposed to trying to just write it off as something that's material. Because there are some paths, some spiritual paths do take that route where you just, turn your back on the physical, social world. But that's not what we're doing. That's like a very unique, different, rare person who's doing that. So for most of us, it's about how do we connect it with the spiritual aim. Okay, Raj, you tell us on time. One more. Okay, if there's anyone else who'd like to add anything.
So you kind of like hit the structure of like how you do spiritual transformation of like who am I, materialism, raising your consciousness, and like finding your meaning or purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of seems like we're structured in a like society where like a lot of those things are designed not to happen. Of like materialism, we have like a consumerist culture, or like finding like meaning is like in power, wealth, and like fame, which is kind of like more ego like centered. So I was like kind of like curious if you identified like one or two major obstacles most people face on their kind of their journey through the spiritual kind of transformation.
Yeah, so I missed the last. Are you saying can you identify a few obstacles that people face
kind of the
on their
ones that
spiritual
you
journey?
noticed, yeah.
Wow, that's a whole. Yeah,
The big ones.
Yeah. Have you ever read a book called Screwtape Letters? Anyone read that? Oh my God, huh? C.S. Lewis. Have you read it? Yeah. It's unbelievable. So C.S. Lewis, the guy who wrote, anyway, you know C.S. Lewis, he wrote Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Narnia series, and a bunch of other books. But he wrote this book called Screwtape Letters, which is just it's just mind blowing. Basically, it's a devil writing letters to his nephew, who's also a devil in training, and who is trying to corrupt somebody, and the uncle is giving him advice as to how to corrupt this person. But what is so genius about it is that it talks about all the issues that we face as a spiritual practitioner, and it does it obviously in a humorous way. But the issues are the same, I think, for most of us, where I think some of the big ones could be. There's something about falsity. There's something about like I want to practice spiritual life that makes me part of some kind of community. To be part of that community, I need to belong and therefore be accepted, which means that I need to behave in a certain way, or at least be known to behave in a certain way. And therefore, my reality, my internal reality, is not that I aspire to. It's not that what people believe I am. And therefore, there's a massive disconnect, which is like imposter syndrome, hypocrisy, all of those types of things that get thrown in there, which is the disconnect between who I am in my mind, who I am when I sit on this chair giving a talk, all of that stuff, right? So I think that's a huge thing. I think and I think it leads to all kinds of problems like guilt and hiding one's failings, covering them up, and therefore leads to the hypocrisy we see in religion. All of those types of problems. So I think there's a big piece about falsity, and that's one of the things that I draw out from the Vedic teachings. There's a phrase in the Bhagavatam that talks about thoroughly honest people, like spiritual life being for thoroughly honest people. And it seems like such a basic thing, but actually being honest with oneself is a real challenge. And somebody remind me, there was somebody famous said this idea that, when what I think is what I say, is what I do, versus a disconnect there, which is misalignment. I think there's a big thing there. I think another big thing is that we're practicing a spiritual path, and there's lots of promises that are given on that path, and I don't always feel like those promises are real. Like I don't always feel the outcome that I was promised as part of my practice, and therefore I'm not sure, is this true? Is this like, am I doing something wrong, or is this just made up, or da, 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 da. So I think there is something about the nature of faith and our engagement with spirituality which comes up against what society seems to present to us as being factual versus what I'm doing, which seems to be faithful, and I don't know how to tell the difference. And I think that's where bad philosophy and bad science and bad religion has a lot to answer for in terms of the disconnect there. And maybe one more. So yeah, what did I say? So like, yeah, hypocrisy, like the internal conflict, the nature of faith and feeling, like there's a lacking there somewhere. And maybe a third one is around community and relationships with others. So I think that most people are practicing some form of spiritual life, require some form of community around them to help them on that journey. And that's supposed to be the panacea of whatever, but it ends up being something that people often find conflict in, like conflict in the very people that you are on this spiritual journey with. And that's difficult, because I can understand I'm having a fight with the guy at work because he's a materialist, but why am I having like all of that stuff, because we draw these artificial boundaries between material and spiritual. And I mean, I could go on, but I think those are three things that do come to mind, and I think that they're consistent. Like I see them everywhere, and yeah, they're real challenges. Thank you for the question. It made me think. Okay, Raj, over to you.
Yeah, it was really great to be back in a session with Nitesh. It's been a while, but yeah, really great questions as well from all of you. I'm really grateful to see you interacting, being really thoughtful, bringing out a discussion. And Nitesh is around for a little while. If anyone would like to come and have conversations when he's around, we do have food as well, which is being served just outside here. So please do stick around and have a meal with us and hang out. But yeah, if I don't get to see you afterwards, once again, thank you all for coming out. Very, very grateful. Hopefully see you soon. Please stay connected. I think I'm connected to most of you, but if I'm not connected to you, please, I'd love to connect before you head out, and we'll hopefully have more sessions like this in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Raj.
One last thing. Unfortunately, we don't have many copies of Nitesh's book, but it is available on Amazon, and we are going to get a new batch coming through soon. So we'll try and just sell it there as well. But I mean, I wouldn't mind on Amazon. It's very easily available. I would highly, highly recommend it. Great book. You know, come take a quick read through it now. But yeah, thank you. Please grab some food and come back and hang out here, chill, meet each other, chat to Nitesh.
Thank you.